was a cold evening in a small coastal town where the wind whispered secrets of the sea through the rustling leaves. Amelia stood by the edge of the cliff, her heart pounding as the waves crashed far below. Fear had been her closest companion for years. Fear of heights, fear of failing, fear of losing control. But that evening, something inside her began to change. The horizon was painted in shades of gold and crimson, and as the sun began to sink, she felt a quiet voice inside her whisper, "It's time." She didn't know what that meant, but she knew it was calling her toward something greater than her fear. Amelia had always been the quiet one, the girl who avoided risks and stayed in her comfort zone. Her friends had moved to big cities, chasing dreams, while she stayed behind helping her father repair fishing nets and mend old boats. Her mother had passed away when she was 10, and since then the sea had both terrified and fascinated her. It was the same sea that had taken her mother away during a stormy night years ago. Every time she stood near it, she could almost hear her mother's laughter, but also the echo of her screams in the wind. The trauma had chained her spirit, but something about this night felt different. That morning, a rumor had spread through the town. A young boy had gone missing near the northern cliffs. The rescue team was searching, but darkness was falling fast. Amelia's father was part of that team, and she couldn't stop worrying. She remembered the boy's mother crying in the marketplace, begging for help. Amelia's heart had ached, but fear kept her from joining the search. The cliffs were dangerous. The paths were narrow and slippery. Yet as the hours passed, guilt began to burn stronger than fear. She realized she couldn't let another mother lose her child to the sea. When she finally grabbed a lantern and stepped out into the stormy dusk, her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and rain began to sting her cheeks. Every step toward the cliff felt like a step toward her past, toward the memory she had avoided for so long. The earth beneath her feet was uneven, and the path grew steeper. The sea roared, as if testing her resolve. "You can't save anyone," her fear whispered. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the will to move forward despite it. And Amelia kept walking. Hours seemed to blur as she followed the dim light of her lantern. Suddenly, a faint cry pierced through the storm. Her heart stopped. She turned, straining to listen, and there it was again, a weak voice calling for help. She scrambled toward the sound, her shoes slipping on the wet rocks. Finally, she saw a small figure clinging to a jagged edge near the cliffside. The boy's clothes were soaked, and his tiny fingers gripped a branch that looked ready to break. Without thinking, Amelia dropped her lantern and crawled toward him. Her hands bled as she grabbed onto the rocks, inching closer with every breath. The boy looked at her with terrified eyes, whispering, "Please don't let me fall." Amelia's entire body trembled. The wind howled, the rain poured, and the sea raged below them. For a second, fear nearly paralyzed her. But then she remembered her mother, how she had once risked everything to save others. Amelia reached out, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Hold on to me," she said. She wrapped her arm around the boy and pulled with all her strength. Her muscles screamed, her knees scraped, but inch by inch she dragged him towards safety. When they finally reached the solid ground, she collapsed beside him, gasping for air. For a long moment they just lay there, breathing heavily, the sound of the storm fading behind them. The boy started crying softly, and Amelia wrapped her arms around him. She didn't realize she was crying too. Her fear, the one that had haunted her since childhood, had no power left. Days turned into weeks, and Amelia found herself walking through the town square differently than before. People would smile at her, tip their hats, and whisper her name with admiration. She was no longer the shy girl hiding behind her fears. Yet, deep inside, she didn't crave attention. What filled her heart was something quieter, a sense of peace she had never known. When she looked at the sea now, she saw not danger, but a reflection of her own strength. Fear still existed, like a faint echo, but it no longer ruled her. It was as if saving that boy had unlocked a door she had kept closed all her life. Her father often sat with her on the porch at night, their lantern glowing softly in the darkness. He'd sip tea, watching her in silence, then finally say, "Your mother would have smiled seeing you now." Those words would always bring tears to Amelia's eyes. The memory of her mother was no longer a wound. It had become a light. Sometimes she dreamt of her, standing at the edge of the same cliff, smiling with pride. In those dreams, Amelia wasn't afraid anymore. The sea didn't separate them. It connected them. The little boy, named Thomas, became like a younger brother to her. His family would visit often, and every time he saw her, he'd run and hug her tightly. He told everyone she was his guardian angel. Amelia laughed at that, but secretly she carried that title in her heart. The bond between them was proof that something miraculous had indeed happened that night. Not just a rescue, but a rebirth of courage, of hope, of love's quiet power to heal what fear once destroyed. One afternoon, Amelia sat on the same cliff, sketching the waves in her old notebook. She hadn't drawn in years. Fear had made her believe she had no talent. But now her hand moved freely, each stroke guided by emotion. A local painter who often passed by saw her sketches and stopped, impressed. "You have an artist's heart," he said. "Would you let me show your work in the gallery?" Amelia froze for a moment, old hesitation creeping in, but then smiled. "Yes," she said softly. That yes was small but powerful, another step toward the life she was meant to live. The exhibition opened a month later. People admired her paintings, all inspired by the sea. One piece, titled "The Night I Found Myself," showed a woman holding a lantern against a storm, her eyes bright with determination. Many stood in silence before it, feeling its emotion. Amelia didn't paint for fame, she painted to speak to souls. Her art told her story, a story of fear turned into faith. And that night, as she stood among her paintings, she realized courage isn't a single act. It's a lifelong companion once you invite it in, but life, as it always does, tested her again. One morning, word came that another storm was approaching, stronger than any in years. The fishermen were urged to bring their boats in. Her father, stubborn as always, insisted he could handle it. Amelia begged him not to go, but he smiled and said, "A fear doesn't belong in our blood anymore." When he left for the harbor, she stood in the doorway, rain beginning to fall, praying to the sea that had once taken and now had given so much. Hours later, lightning split the sky, and the winds howled like wild beasts. The town gathered at the shore, watching helplessly as waves rose higher than rooftops. Then, through the chaos, Amelia saw something, her father's boat struggling against the current. Without thinking, she grabbed a rope and ran toward the pier. The old fear tried to whisper again, but courage roared louder. The memory of that night with Thomas flashed before her eyes. She knew what she had to do. She tied the rope around her waist and plunged into the water. The cold hit her like knives, but she kept swimming, her arms slicing through the waves. She reached the boat, clinging to its side, shouting, "Dad, take my hand!" The old man looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief and pride. Together they fought the storm, daughter and father's strength and legacy, love and survival. When they finally reached the dock, exhausted and drenched, the crowd erupted in cheers. But Amelia didn't hear them. She was crying in her father's arms. That night, as the storm passed and calm returned, Amelia sat by the window, watching the moonlight ripple across the wet earth. Her father slept beside the fire, breathing softly. The sea outside was peaceful again, as if apologizing for its fury. Amelia whispered, "I forgive you." Not just to the sea, but to herself, for all the years she had lived in fear, for all the times she had doubted her strength. The words lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Months went by and her art began to reach other towns. Letters came from people who said her paintings gave them courage. A soldier who faced battle, a mother fighting illness, a child afraid of the dark. Amelia would read their words and smile, knowing her story had traveled farther than she ever could. She understood now that courage, once awakened, spreads like fire, igniting others to believe, to rise, to overcome. One day, a journalist visited to write about her miraculous story. He asked, "What gave you the strength to do what you did?" Amelia looked out toward the sea and said, "It wasn't strength, it was love. Fear tells you to protect yourself. Love tells you to protect others. That's the difference. That's the difference." Her answer became the headline of the article. "Love is greater than fear." It touched hearts far beyond her little town. Years later, Amelia opened an art school for children near the coast. She wanted to teach them not just how to draw, but how to express what they felt. Their fears, their dreams, their stories. Thomas, now grown, became her first assistant. He often told the students, "Our teacher once saved my life and taught me to be brave." The laughter and light in the school became a symbol of everything Amelia had fought for. Sometimes when she walked along the shore at sunset, she'd see mothers holding their children, fishermen pulling in their nets, and seagulls circling overhead. The town had changed. It was brighter, more alive. Courage had become part of its heartbeat. People had learned from her that miracles don't always come from heaven. Sometimes they come from an ordinary heart that decides not to give up. As years folded into decades, Amelia's hair turned silver, but her eyes still held the same spark that had once faced the storm. On her last birthday, surrounded by family, friends, and students, she looked toward the sea and whispered, "Thank you." That night, the waves shimmered as though answering her. It was said by the townsfolk that a soft light appeared near the cliffs, a lantern glow that danced above the water, just like the night she saved a life. When Amelia passed peacefully in her sleep, the town mourned but celebrated her too. They built a statue by the cliff, a woman holding a lantern against the wind, forever reminding everyone that courage begins where fear ends. People came from far and wide to see it, to feel the quiet strength it radiated. And every evening, as the sun set and painted the sea in gold and crimson, the statue's shadow stretched long and proud, a symbol of how one brave heart can light 1,000 more. Even now, when storms roll in and the waves crash loud, the townspeople say they hear a gentle whisper in the wind. It's time, and in that whisper, courage is born again. The sea no longer frightens them, it inspires them, as it once inspired her. Amelia's story became legend, but it was more than that. It was a truth as timeless as the tides, that miracles happen not when we escape fear, but when we rise above it.